Welcome to Expanding Access, a podcast by Behavioral Health Tech, where we explore the cutting edge of mental health, substance use, and autism and IDD care. Each episode features insightful conversations with industry leaders who are driving real change through technology and innovation. Whether you're a provider, payer, or just passionate about expanding access to behavioral health care, you won't want to miss these stories. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone. I'm Solome Tibabu, your host of the Expanding Access podcast, where we're talking about all things expanding access to behavioral health services through technology, health equity, and innovation. And I'm so delighted to have Dr. Jen Huberty with us today. We have a lot to cover, but before I jump in, maybe Dr. Huberty, if you could just give a little background about yourself, that would be a helpful start.
Yeah, sure. So I have a PhD in exercise physiology, actually, but I started in academic research. I spent 20 years there, and I always kind of believed that science should be done in real world settings. And I worked a lot with non-for-profits and for-profits. And I ended up at Calm, the mobile meditation app Calm. A long road to get there, but I was running their science, showing proof for their evidence and what they were doing, and grew their team, spent 5 years there. And I felt like, wow, what I'm done here, I could probably help a lot of other companies do. So I started my own company almost 3 years ago now. It's called Fit-Minded. Now we're doing research for all kinds of companies in behavioral health, digital health.
Thanks so much, Dr. Huberty. You have such an amazing background. And I'd love to just set the stage with what is going on in digital health today, particularly around the startups that are interested in partnering with payers, and what kind of outcomes are they expected to be showing?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of a history here. It's like years ago, 5, 6 years ago, we were really focused on the direct-to-consumer market. And over the years, we've become more focused on the B2B market and the payer market. And so what happened there is that in direct-to-consumer, science isn't as much of big outcomes and impact wasn't and isn't as important as when you get to B2B and you get to payers, because you have bigger investment, more people, right? So what we've seen is that as we're in these B2B markets and looking at payers is we're looking at, well, we have been looking at engagement and retention. And that's been the thing. Do people sign up? Do they use it? But that's really not enough anymore. Now it's like you're the last man standing if you can present that you are seeing an impact with what your product or service is doing. And so that means measurable outcomes in behavioral health. That's mental health outcomes, right? To show that we're improving lives. And even now the case is long-term, more so than just short-term. We're seeing that just in the last little bit. So that's pretty much where we are right now.
Super helpful. You summed that up really well. And I guess just to tease that out a little bit more, it seems that many founders worry that science is too expensive for their early stage companies. Maybe you could walk through, let's say, a pre-seed startup and how they could actually start building a scientific foundation without breaking the bank and being able to pursue some of these planned partnerships.
Yeah. So this is so important because I really feel like companies, big or small, pre-series, series A, B, if they haven't engaged in some type of science, they're more than likely sitting on data that they don't even know about. So it's like the first thing you have to think about as a founder is, what data do I have? And have I told a story about that data? Now, ideally, it's a publication, but it doesn't have to be. There's a lot of iterations of how you can get that information out. But I think that's super important. Oftentimes, especially in these pre-series companies, founders don't have anyone who can help them think about that or do that. And so we don't know what we're sitting on. And sometimes I come into these companies and they're sitting on so much information. They don't even need to start thinking about studies. They have so much data that we can go through. And then the other part of that is not only is it telling the story, but it should be driving and informing business decisions. So again, when you're sitting on this preliminary first data in these pre-series early stage, it's like, there's your answers. What do I do with my product next? Well, you go look at that data you collected, even if it's testimonial, you go look at that, and then that helps you make decisions on where you go next. So I think that's something that's not expensive and early stage companies can be focused on. They end up getting more for their money in the sense of they're able to make decisions on product and services without misinformed information so that they're building something that then doesn't work and they have to go back and rebuild. And then the other part of this too is that the science and the way companies think about data should really be aligned to their business goals. It's very different than science, generally speaking. It's like, where do we want to go? What's the data, science, story, research to get us there? That's the only science you should be doing. So
something you just said earlier is focused on not just the resources that they already have, which might be a ton of data, in fact, but spending wisely and really right-sizing that research investment. How would you approach research investments differently from, say, an early stage startup like a seed or Series A versus much later stage companies?
Yeah, I think one important thing here is that no matter the size, you have to have a strategy. One step leads to the next step. So you do something and you think you're going to do the next thing when you start the first thing, but the first thing tells you what direction you go with the next thing. So it's a step process. So it has to have some type of strategy. We have to have direction. We don't want to just be one-offing. Even when we're trying to save money and we're right-sizing research, we don't want to just be doing one-offs. And all these companies are doing one-offs. Oh, let's do this now. Oh, let's do this now. And it's like, okay, focus in, upside down triangle, right? Where are we trying to go? So thinking about that. But there are scientific methods that can be used to gain insights without heavy spend. And even when you don't even have any data. So we've worked with companies where they're just getting started with a prototype. And there's not a lot of justification for what they're doing, but it is a problem, but it's not at the top of everybody's mind. So it's like, okay, we can do something like a national survey in potentially their market and say, are you having problems with this? And what are those problems? And how are you not able to solve them? And then, oh, look at this. There's a publication on this problem and my company's solving it. And that's not even their data, but it's a database justification for what they're trying to do. That's like foundational. And then from there, it is like a lot of smaller companies right sizing research. It's like, oh, we've had 2,000 people use our app, but they know nothing about them. And it's like, okay, well, let's talk to those 2,000 people very simply. Why did they stay? Why did they go? The why did they go is more important than the why did they stay. If you're talking about access and behavioral health, right? Those are the questions we really want to be asking. So these are all looking at it differently. And again, like even these later stage companies, they're thinking, okay, we're going to launch this new product or this new version or this new something. And it's like, there are ways to do low budget research, betas, prototype before you grow and build something that costs you thousands of dollars in engineering that then flops. But there are ways to not waste money and be resource friendly.
Yeah, you mentioned quite a few landmines in that already. And I'd love to hear a little bit about what are some of the biggest mistakes that you're seeing digital health companies make when they finally decide to invest in science? And of course, how can those leaders avoid wasting resources on said mistakes or wrong types of research?
Yeah, I think a lot of times, and this is a part of like what a scientist needs to understand that's in industry is there's a great degree of education and knowledge building that has to happen. And there's patience and compassion that has to come with that because founders are not scientists. They don't understand it. They have a vision, they have a goal, and they want to get there and they want to get there fast. They want to make money. They want to do all those things, right? So some of that is like the scientists really thinking about it, about how to educate and provide knowledge so that it's easier for anybody, not just the CEO, but leaders in cross-functional teams to understand what's happening. But for a founder, it's like, if I could build my most perfect founder, it's they trust me. So there's trust that I'm going to be using the resources appropriately. I'm not going to make any decisions without checking in with you. I have a team that's going to handle everything for you, so trust is a big factor if CEOs can trust the process, literally. Like I have one company that I've had for 2.5 years and the CEO has trusted the process completely. It was a little rocky at the very beginning, but this company has thrived on science because they've just like, okay, we're going to do this, and resources were kind. And so I think trust is a big thing. And I think also not being afraid to try new things. That's what makes us innovative and different, is trying new things. And also not rushing. Like, let's just take the little time to do the betas, the beta testing, the little snippet testing before we go grow something. It's not that much longer, right? At the end of the day, slow and steady wins the race. So I think those are like some of the things that founders can be thinking of for that.
Now, you mentioned trust quite a bit there. Just to really hit this message home, can you share with our audience, what is the trust equation?
Yeah. So a lot of trust has to do with like what you're building so that other people believe you, they trust you, right? So first of all, you have to have evidence-based claims. But when I say that, that doesn't mean what everybody else or other products have done to make yours like assumption that it's going to work. So for example, I'll go to websites of companies and they're like, we're evidence backed. And then you go to look at the evidence and the evidence is actually not their evidence. It's someone else's evidence that says that stress is reduced through meditation, but that doesn't mean your meditation reduces stress or your methodology or whatever that is, right? So evidence-based claims, that's actually your evidence, not others. Transparency is very important. I think with payers, this is a big deal because that's why companies want to write white papers. And I'm like, I don't recommend it. I mean, there's a place and time for it. And we do write them for companies, but at the end of the day, you don't have to be as transparent, and like, you don't really know whose data it is. And so you have to be transparent in peer reviewed papers because someone's reviewing, the scientific community is reviewing that. So if you are writing white paper, that's fine, but be transparent about your methods. Tell the truth about really what happened. Be inclusive of everything. Don't leave things out. You know, I'll send results to founders sometimes and they send it back to me and they want edits. And I'm like, I can't make those edits because that's the data. And if I make those edits, I'm lying, and that's not my job. What you do is on your watch, but that's not going to come from a final document from me, right? So we have to be super transparent. And I think if we tell the story and we talk about how we're going to do better or be better, I think that's just as important. Consistency. So you'll see claims and then you'll see other claims and then and none of the numbers match. And it's kind of confusing. Wait, anxiety. Wait, what? Did this include depression? And this was depression and anxiety. Is it mental health? Like, define mental health? Like, okay. Consistency. You tell me the story the same way every time. Boring, drab, but tell me the story the same way. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like, this is how we have claims that stand independently. This is how we build business functions and make them move faster. And I always tell everybody, it's like stronger science. It's easier to sell something. It truly is easier to sell something.
So great. And speaking of research papers, it's a crowded market of mental health apps today. How does having published research actually translate into winning deals and partnerships that perhaps competitors can't access for the startups?
Yeah. So I would say it's like what I talked about. Like, first, you have to have your own evidence. You really want to have your own evidence. You don't want to lean on others if you don't have to. And so that means don't go too fast. Get your own evidence, because once you stand in front of an audience and you try to sell yourself and they tell you you need your own evidence and then you go back, it's like a poor taste in their mouth. It's like you already had a negative and now you're coming back. Just do a good job the first time. Just don't come to me for 60 days instead of in the next 10. Just be patient. And if you do it right, it will work. I've watched it happen. I've talked to over 280 companies in the 2.5 years. It does happen. And then publications, I always say, if like you're the last man standing, you're the last, or woman standing, you're the last woman standing, because at the end of the day, you have the published data to prove it. And this competitor has data, but it's a white paper and we're not really sure who did it and what they did. But this one was peer reviewed and this one is in a medical journal that clinicians read. So we'll go with this one. So that's super important. And then it's also like, can I understand the claims? So don't make it too difficult to understand what it's like. We don't need crazy sexy ways of like writing up numbers. It's like 80% decreased. Okay, done. Like we don't have to make this a bigger deal than that. Just give me straight to the punch. Like this is how many people did it and this is how many people were impacted. And I think that the other part of this that's super important is that, again, companies want to know like why science and what's the importance. It's like, if these things are happening, the publications, the quantifiable claims, it's your own data. When a salesperson gets a no, they have ammunition to get someone to say yes. When a marketing person needs to write something for the audience, they have actually good information to write. When you want to have a partnership with another business to do business together and sell together, you have claims that make sense for that partner to engage with you. And then the most important thing that everybody's looking for is investors. So investors are like, okay, here's some data I can put my money behind, right? So I feel like the more buttoned up you are with these things, even though all these companies claim science, you don't realize how unbuttoned up they are. So go in as buttoned up as you can, because you're going to win it. You're going to stand out from everybody else.
Exactly. The better the science, the better so many areas of all the categories you've talked about and stakeholders that you could impact improves.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it'd be great to hear if you have any specific examples of how any one of your clients use scientific evidence to create that moat to get ahead of competitors that's really impacted their business. Would love to hear more.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example, and I have a few, but I'll start with one. But I want to say a preface to this is that this didn't happen in 60 days. This took time. It took investment. I'm not talking millions of dollars, but investment in terms of like patience, meetings, going back and forth, like whatever it is that happens, education, being open, all those things happen to make this happen. So I always preface these things because people just assume it's going to be just a transaction. And it just doesn't really work like that. It's like you're loving on your company. So you have to love on the science to love on the company. So anyway, so I had a company that I started with like 2.5 years ago, pediatric mental health. The very first step, I do this with most of my companies. I go in and I do an assessment. Like, where are we at? What are you sitting on that's gold? Where are your gaps and how can we fill those? And then what do we do for the next year? Where's our strategy? And so we actually went in and modified assessments that cost them engineering time, but they were assessments that were missing the mark and were missing a whole entire population related to their population. Turns out that fast forward 2 years, this is making them. So that was the first part. Then we were doing retrospective data analysis. We published 16 papers and going for this company, highlighted key findings, did all the things to share with people. And so they became the first to have these type of extensive outcomes. Eventually, we ended up with a medical claims partnership. So we partnered to get medical claims data. That's right now about to go into review. So they're going to have, again, but this is 2 years of work. 2 years of investment, 2 years of love, and then a fundable score and a $2.5 million grant. And the reason I mentioned the grant is because this climate is tough. And two, they want to add a service. So we are actually developing the service and testing the science behind the service, the efficacy of it in the grant. And then they get to take that to commercialize it. So the grant isn't to commercialize it, it's to build it and get the evidence for it. And now this company is set up for Series B. Their competitors don't have anything to match to, and payers have an easy time making decisions. So again, that's like 2+ years of work. And there's, not all companies have to be doing it for 2 years, but science takes time. And if you invest in it at the beginning, it's like the roots. So it kind of is easier to just show the fruits of your labor, I guess.
Yeah, start the right way and no quick fixes necessarily, but of course, so worth it. One thing related, I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about startups who might be concerned about revealing their secret sauce through published research. How do you balance transparency in science with maintaining that competitive advantage?
Yeah, for sure. There are some times where we have to make decisions like we're not going to do a paper on this. because it's too much information, right? And that's okay, because it's not like we're hiding anything or doing anything negative. We're just choosing not to make it a public thing. That happens sometimes. I do recommend that. But for the most part, it's like, again, this transparency part is like sharing your methods, what you did. A lot of these behavioral health companies, they're using a framework or some kind of a model or something like collaborative care or whatever it is. And so it's like most people know what that is. So it's not like rocket science. It's not, nobody owns any of those frameworks or theories or models. Those have been around for a long time. It's the way they maneuver them. But again, if you're giving more methodological umbrella, it actually builds credibility and helps to establish you as a leader. And people who are going to copy it, they'll shortcut it anyway, and it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, people always say to me, if someone's copying you, you're doing a good thing. So that company should be losing themselves, right? But like proprietary things and algorithms nowadays, all that kind of stuff, that's obviously nothing we want to be sharing, but it's more for credibility and not for replication and thinking about that. Yeah, that's what I would say about the secret sauce. Don't be afraid to be a leader and just don't give up too much.
Oh, I love that. Super helpful. Now I'd like to pivot a little bit about how does this play out in actual teams, and what does it actually look like when science is integrated across teams like sales, product, marketing? Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that is a very important topic, Salome, because I feel like companies are already siloed. It's interesting how many companies are siloed. Like marketing doesn't talk to sales, doesn't talk to product. It's very interesting. Some are more integrated, but a lot of them are very siloed. So you've got to be able to spread the love, spread the science across the team. And so how I like to do that, I call it traveling science. And there's ways to conduct science so that it travels. That's what I call it. And so when you're highlighting science, the way you talk about it to sales is going to be different to product and different to marketing, right? That's something that scientists should know. A lot of scientists don't know how to do that, but it's super important because a salesperson does not care about the same things a product person does. And so they're not going to use it unless you give it to them in a usable way. But traveling science and integrating it across teams, some of the things that we tell people to consider is cross-functional meetings to share science. It doesn't have to be all the time because science doesn't move as fast, at least quarterly. I always recommend that scientists are keeping up with the roadmaps of the other teams because, in my opinion, science has its own roadmap, but their roadmap should be built on everybody else's, not its own. So it's not science for the sake of science. Remember, science is for business. So what is product roadmap? How is science going to feed that? What is marketing's roadmap? How is science going to feed that? If you're not feeding your teams, you're working in a silo of science, and then you're going to get cut because eventually there's no value to that. What's the value, right? So the other thing we like to do are Slack channels. We're big on Slack channels because they're quick, easy tidbits you can be sharing science. Like, check out this cool finding with your data. Oh, cool. Can I use that? You got a figure on there? And then we lead them to a document where we store all those things. So those are just like what I call traveling science. That's important. But you got to have your CMOs, your CEOs behind that, right? They have to be encouraging people to participate and do those things.
Right. Yes. And related, if you could share a little bit of your playbook for how do you actually get an engineering team or a marketing team to really care about and use scientific insights in their daily work?
Yeah. So again, it's what are their goals? Like, I want to know what's your goal. And so product people will say, well, I need this much engagement and I need this much retention. And it's like, well, if you can do X, Y, and Z, like show X, Y, and Z, this person will be more likely to come back. In other words, giving the user a tangible, let's say, that shows how impactful something was for them. If they build that in the system, that's going to bring them back, right? Oh, so this will help retention. Oh, this will help engagement. Okay, we can talk about that, right? But if I just say nudging has an effect size of like Okay. Anyway, whatever that means, right? So it's like you really have to think about, like, I always go in with what's your goal? What are you trying to do? Don't worry about me. I'm worried about you. Like, I want to serve you. I want to help you. I'm here to be that. And I will say this playbook, it's hard. Depends on who the engineering person is and who the sales person is or whatever. But the other thing is that the languaging that I was talking about at the beginning is like, we have to lead with the business impact. Don't talk about science first. Talk about the business and don't use research language. So it's hard for scientists to do that, but you have to like, right? And then you can talk about success stories. So if they have examples that are exactly like what they want to do, that helps them think about it more. And then some of the other things I already talked about with like research briefs and lunch and learns and things like that. But that's basically the playbook, if you will, of how to work with those teams.
Yeah, that's great advice. Let's say I'm a new chief science officer, I would love to embrace that advice for the teams that I'm working with. But how about, what advice would you give to a brand new chief science officer in this space for what next steps should they take to be the most successful they could be in their role?
Make sure you have some type of business degree. I'm just teasing. You don't necessarily have to have a business degree. I do not have a business degree, but I learned at the hard knock life of calm. I'm very fortunate and very grateful. I say that every day to anyone I talk to go from a company with 20 people to 300 and on a unicorn, the rocket ship to the unicorn, they called it. Like, I learned everything about business, right? And I was sailing my own ship there. I was doing what I felt was necessary and learned a lot of lessons. But I will say that I think one of the things that leaders, founders should think about when they're shopping for scientists is that a scientist can understand business. And like when they're interviewing and talking to you, that you get the sense that they understand business. Give them business problems to solve with science. So if a chief science officer, if they're getting started, it's like, you got to solve the business problems and you got to do it with science, right? You're not solving science problems. You're not contributing to the literature. You're not, I mean, yes, you are at the end of the day, but that's not your first priority. I could go on forever about that, but yeah. So that's what we need to be thinking about.
Excellent advice. And I mean, Dr. Huberty, I'm just so grateful for you to be able to share these insights with us. But I want to make sure our audience knows the work that you do at FitMinded and the kinds of clients that you mostly engage. If you could share a little bit more about FitMinded and where people can find you, I think that would be a great wrap up here.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. We're on LinkedIn and all the things. We do have a website. It's Fit-Minded, but we have a team of 7. I have 3.5 scientists that work for me full time. And we work with anywhere from pre-series all the way to Series C and public companies, UK, Canada, US. We don't only work with US companies, but typically we engage with companies through some type of an audit or a needs assessment so we can get, figure out what this strategy is. We're not really a company that'll just come in and do a one-off because I'm trying to help a company grow, and that to me isn't going to get there. I'm invested in these companies. And so we work on retainers. We do some project based, but once we establish the strategy, then we execute the strategy according to that. And again, it's like cross-sectional surveys, it's UX, UI research, it's beta testing and prototype and pilots, it's RCTs, it's writing, science communicate. I mean, name it. We have it all on our website, but we literally do it all. I have a very amazing team of scientists and of course, COO and all those people that make the companies. I know Salome knows that you can't function without those people. Those people are amazing to companies. So that's it in a nutshell.
That's fit-minded.com, everybody. And of course, if you enjoyed our conversation today, we are going to have plenty of discussion about measuring outcomes, developing a science base in behavioral health, such a popular topic these last several years at the 2025 Behavioral Health Tech Conference. See Dr. Huberty and so many other experts there. Can't wait. thrilled to partner with you and so many others. San Diego, November 11th through 13th. And thank you once again, Dr. Huberty, for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you for having me, Salome.
Thanks for tuning in to Expanding Access. We hope you're feeling inspired by today's discussion. If you've enjoyed the episode, subscribe and share it with your network. For more content and opportunities to get involved in transforming care, visit behavioralhealthtech.com. Until next time, let's keep pushing boundaries and expanding access together.